gay pride is an anathema to Islamist ideology.
It's something that you do wonder at what point is not just Germany but across Europe people are going to wake up to.
The AfD being incredibly popular with German LGBT people.
They're very quick to say, let's not be divisive, let's not jump to conclusions.
I just get the impression that Zack Polanski is thick.
His ratings have been going down. The Greens are only at 8% in some polls.
Even when it comes to a question of incitement, that line has to be drawn incredibly tightly.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. With me in the studio, we have Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
Joining us again, returning guest, Albie Amankona. Welcome back.
Good to be back in a brand new studio. I'm sat in the middle.
Star guest.
And this time around, we actually can see each other rather than that kind of police lineup that we used to sit in. So this is a bit more hospitable, I think.
Hospitable. So we've got loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing the Berlin terror attack, Zack Polanski's brush with the law, and for Spike supporters on the Spike podcast Unlocked, we will discuss the Jason Arde plagiarism scandal. So on Saturday, a Islamist terrorist rammed into a crowd at the St. Christopher's Day parade in Berlin, a gay pride parade. He got out of the car, he began slashing at people. One woman is dead, at least 29 others have injuries. Tom, this has become a grimly familiar feature of European life, and not just because of the terror attack itself, but the fact that this man, Abdul Balut, was known to the authorities beforehand.
No, there are so many cases like this now. I mean, to say that he was known to the authorities is probably a grim understatement. It was only back in May that he was convicted of preparing acts of terrorism. He'd been arrested a year previously. He was trying to make his way to Syria to join ISIS, was deported back to Germany, and was eventually sort of tried as a juvenile and allowed out on probation, originally on some level of quite stringent monitoring, but even that got relaxed after a couple of weeks because he'd done a few sessions in an anti-radicalization course, and that was enough to reassure them that he wouldn't be a threat to the public. So there's a grim inevitability about this case, as there is so many others. It's also just so striking that Germany has become the sort of epicenter for this new rise in Islamist terrorism over the course of the past couple of years. I believe they've had about 6 attacks like this over that period, 10 that have been known to have been foiled by the police. And looking at the statistics, at least 30,000 people, they believe, in Germany who are part of this kind of broader Islamist scene. At least 10,000 of them are oriented towards violence. And it's something that you do wonder at what point is not just Germany, but across Europe, people are going to wake up to, really. It's something that there was a bit of a lull in this kind of Islamist barbarism a few years ago. ISIS had been defeated, COVID had disrupted a lot of the sort of existing networks, but particularly after October the 7th, it's come roaring back. There's an academic at King's College London, Peter Newman, who reckons there's been a 400% rise in terrorism across Europe over the course of 2022 to 2024. And Germany right now seems to be right at the middle of it. And one detail which I think is particularly difficult, not just for Germany, but for more sort of liberal-minded people, I suppose, across Europe, is that this seems to be in large part an imported problem now. The amount of people that they took in over the 2010s, post-2015, the Wir schaffen das moment and what have you. There's an alarming number of people, though it's not necessarily strictly true in this case because he was a German citizen, who are turning to the most barbaric acts of violence against nations which have just very recently taken them in. So there's a lot to unpick, there's a lot to discuss, but I think that the kind of mix of complacency, credulity in the face of people who claim that they have changed their ways, and just a refusal to reckon with the scale of the problem that exists there. I mean, this is a story that repeats itself across Europe, but Germany, as I say, seems to be right in the middle of it at the moment.
Yeah, Abby, what's your reaction, Dee?
Well, as someone who has been to that event, and I'm gay, I go to pride events quite often, that event that this terrorist attack took place at was a pride event. And I think, as far as I'm aware, it's the first time something like that has happened at a major pride event in Europe, at least that I can remember. I know there was an attack in Orlando some years ago, but certainly in Europe, as far as I'm aware, it's the first time something like that has happened. If I can just describe this event to people in the UK who might not be familiar with it, this is the equivalent to Pride in London. So imagine a terrorist attack happening on Regent Street as the Pride parade is floating past. Imagine a terrorist attack happening in Brighton, in the park that Brighton Pride takes place in. Tens of thousands of people all enjoying themselves, having a great time, terrorist attack happens. That is essentially what this St. Christopher's Day parade is like. And I've been. It's great fun. I saw and did things in Berlin that I've not seen and done since, but it was great fun. And one of the things that I found interesting, when I went to the Pride Parade in Berlin, and I don't know if it's still like that, but from what I recall, when you go to British Pride parades, there is a barrier between the Pride Parade proper and then people who are spectating. Whereas when I went to the Pride Parade in Berlin, anyone can just walk into the parade. Now, that might have changed because it was some years ago that I went, but I just remember thinking at the time, not that anything sinister was going to happen, but I just noticed that as a difference between Pride events in the UK that I've been to and this one Pride event in Germany that I've been to. So I don't know whether or not that's changed, but I just found that interesting, which would actually make something like what happened perhaps a little bit easier to do, although not impossible. Those barriers are quite flimsy in London, certainly. I think your point about liberal-minded people is interesting, because a lot of the time it is sort of liberal-minded people on the left who say things like, all diversity is good, it's not a threat to women, it's not a threat to gay people, it's not a threat to trans people. This Islamist terrorist targeted a gay pride parade, I believe, because it was a gay pride parade. And gay pride is an anathema to Islamist ideology and certainly more conservative forms of Islam. Yes, and Christianity and Catholicism and Judaism, as some people would say, but you don't get fundamentalist Christians driving cars into pride parades. They might stand there with a placard saying sodomy is a sin, but that's about as offensive as it gets. And I think most of us can deal with that in a world where we think, free speech reigns supreme. If some hardcore Christian wants to go and stand there with a placard saying sodomy is a sin, go for it. If you're an Islamist terrorist that's going to slash people and try and run them over with cars, no.
It was interesting seeing the reaction where actually a lot of people involved with the organisation of the parade itself, they're very quick to say, let's not be divisive, let's not jump to conclusions. And there was a viral video of one speaker who said, she was glad that it wasn't a Turk, or she used this kind of strange slang word, Kanaka, which is kind of a racial slur. But anyway, that's not really the point. She said, I hoped it had been a white Christian man who had done this, someone from the right. And you're thinking, well, this is what has happened. These are the facts on the ground. We need to confront them as they are. But this desire to deflect, even in the face of horrors, is still with us.
No, and it's something that we witness in the wake of terror attacks here. It's something that you see across the West. First of all, this kind of pivot to almost all forms of hate, all forms of extremism, a refusal to name the specific threat. It was fascinating seeing the responses on social media as well as in the German press, just a kind of carbon copy of the sorts of things that we would see. These platitudes about we should not let this divide us. They want to divide us. They don't want to divide us. They want to kill us. That's something that needs to be at the front of everyone's mind. And as you say, the way in which the kind of identitarian set, which I would distinguish from just ordinary gay people in Germany or anywhere else, to very explicitly make this move. And it does make you wonder, like, at what point will this alliance, which has been particularly firmed up, I think it's fair to say, post October the 7th, Queers for Palestine, I suppose, is the meme version of that, but it does speak to something amongst the activist set which has taken place, where there is this desire to deflect, even in the face of horrors like this. And yet it exists on a kind of activist level. But if you look below the surface, if you look at the fact like the AfD has currently got more gay voters in Germany than any other party.
I also wonder if there is something about the leader of the populist right party in Germany being a lesbian and this Islamist terrorist attack being on a pride parade. I wonder if there's something we're not interrogating in that is it not just an attack on the German gay community, but sort of a direct attack on the leader of the AfD's way of life, and the fact that she's in a civil partnership with another woman, a brown woman, I might add. But there's just another dimension to this, which I think should be interrogated, because the leader of the main populist right party in Germany is in fact a lesbian. It's probably been to that event herself.
I did want to ask you about, this theme of the, gay people voting for the AfD. You wrote a fantastic piece for us a while back. One of our most viral pieces of the year, so thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear it.
this is becoming a noticeable trend of gay people abandoning the left. Many people assume that LGBT groups must have a certain political viewpoint, but it's becoming much more pronounced. And I think that the rise of Islamism must be one of the key drivers here.
Look, I agree completely. I wrote this article about homo nationalism back in, I think it was December, early January sort of time, sort of predicting that homo nationalism would come to Britain. And it's a phenomenon that we've seen in mainland Europe, in Germany, in Spain, in France. We see in France and Germany, notably, that the Front National has got the most gay MPs in Parliament, and we also saw a poll done on the gay dating app, although calling it a dating app is a bit dubious, hookup app called Gay Romeo, which is like the German equivalent of Grindr, which saw the AfD being incredibly popular with German LGBT people. And I do think we're seeing that come to Britain. I've always said, when you go to Conservative Party conference, I remember the first time I went, I could not believe how gay it was. I also heard from friends that went to CPAC, Great Britain, whatever it's called. I don't know what CPAC stands for. Apparently it was terrible. But that aside, apparently that too was full of gay people. And one of the things that I find quite interesting is a lot of these kind of young Anglo-Zoomer types that are spouting out ethno-nationalist tripe, I would call ethno-nationalist tripe, on YouTube and social media. A lot of them are young gay men, and they
May not know it yet.
Some of them may not know
This
it yet.
Restore Britain crowd.
Wow, there we go. But from those of them that I know who are, one of the things that they speak about, maybe not in public, but certainly in private, is that they feel a very real concern about the impact of Islamist terrorism and perhaps socially conservative attitudes towards their way of life, and how that might impact them in the future.
In recent weeks and years and months, we've seen it's not just gay people, it's Jews. There's been a particular problem in the UK. Prior to that, young girls enjoying pop concerts. It's every aspect of life that makes us free.
Satire
magazines, freedom of speech, every aspect of Western life that we feel is, most of us should feel is worth defending, is the thing that needles them the most, that riles them up the most.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think what we're seeing is the sort of liberal values, proper liberal values that many of us still hold to, and I think most people in the country would really celebrate, are under threat, certainly from Islamism and radical Islam, and also the sort of broader challenges around social cohesion that even just having a sort of large, quite socially conservative Muslim population poses to a society like Britain, but also from this much more warped version of liberalism that we have come to expect, that we kind of associate with liberal politics, which has got it into its head that multiculturalism is absolutely fine, that you can essentially invite anyone into your country, even if they enter via quite dubious means from quite questionable parts of the world, shall we say, where the attitudes are very different, and that everything will be absolutely fine. I mean, this is something which is coming under sustained criticism now. I think people are waking up to it. There is, as I say, this massive gap between the way in which the political class and media elites talk about these issues and the way in which the sort of tectonic plates of public opinion are shifting under the surface. That's something which is going to break out sooner rather than later. And it's also something that, to go back to our point about the populist right, that at various points you had different figures who have tapped into this. We've seen it to a certain extent with the leadership of the AfD. Even here at Wilders in the Netherlands would kind of pose as the sort of bulwark against Islamism in order to protect kind of Dutch liberal values, gay rights, etc. So that's something which I think is going to become only more pronounced as the months come on, and what we're recognizing that the threat is that combination of, yes, radical Islam, Islamism, etc., but also this defective warped version of liberalism, which is really just sort of a form of multiculturalism, I suppose, or a form of cultural relativism, which has crept in, and those two things together is a very dangerous mix, and we're starting to see the effects of that everywhere, unfortunately.
I think the only other point I would make is about the age of a lot of the perpetrators of these terrorist attacks. These are young men, not dissimilar to age in us, who might be second or third generation migrants to the country. Some people might argue I was a third generation migrant to the country. Could I have imagined doing something like that? No. What is it that would make me think I would want to betray my country in the same way that these young men have betrayed their countries, in a way that perhaps my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation never would have done, despite the fact those two generations preceding us, if you are from immigrant backgrounds, are much closer to that sort of socially conservative thinking that is imported from other countries. Why is it that we are seeing the children of migrants who are British or German, in this case, execute these sorts of terrorist attacks against their own country people? That's something which I think needs to be interrogated. We talk about the importation of problems. Yeah, there's lots of problems that are imported, but there are some homegrown issues here as well.
I think that's a really interesting point. And it's something actually, if you kind of track back over not just the past couple of decades, but further than that, you really see that quite pronounced when the Rushdie affair gets kicked off. And there was reports from the big demonstration that was held in Hyde Park where people were burning effigies of Rushdie and whatnot. It was commented upon that a lot of them were young, British-born, wearing jeans. The kind of previous generation, their parents who might have come over might be quite religiously observant, but were kind of just keeping their head down, kind of getting on with things. And I think, again, we're seeing that kind of interaction between, yes, culture and ideology, which is to a certain extent brought into the country, but also the way in which that is met with our own sort of domestic identity politics, self-loathing. Obviously, the rise of Islamism more broadly. There's more people trying to radicalize. There's more organizations that one can go to. There's something that people are, in a depraved fashion, wanting to be a part of. But there's also something about our own nations, which is, in a sense, telling them that they're right, like this sense of alienation, the sense that this society is kind of rotten,
Yeah,
that there's nothing
everyone
good.
hates you.
Everyone hates
You're
you.
never going to get anywhere in life.
It mirrors the Islamist script so closely. It's fascinating, and it's not a surprise, I think, that when you look at many of these homegrown terrorist cases, they will often reach for the script of Islamophobia in, when they were knocking through school or whatever it might be. The kind of victim complex being, at least in large part, something which is being rationalized, rubber stamped by our culture in this country, as well as I say, anything that they might have brought with them or the family might have brought with them.
It reminds me of the grooming gang leader who, complained in court that it's fashionable to blame everything on Muslims, even after he was found guilty. But there you go. Let's talk about Zack Polanski.
Well, Zack.
The Metropolitan Police have said that they are not doing any further investigation into a Instagram post that he shared. I mean, he was invited to collaborate on a post which contained lots of images, and one of them had a slightly nerdy Green Party member had a t-shirt on it that said "Making Plans for Nigel" after that XTC song, but it had a picture of a guillotine. Tom, this is obviously in just the worst possible taste imaginable, particularly after a Reform member was brutally murdered only a few weeks ago. But really, we don't want to be pursuing politics through the courts and through the police. I mean, it's a good thing, really, that Zack Polanski hasn't been arrested.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I can certainly understand the strength of feeling amongst Reform activists as well as top-level Reform people to see that image in the wake of what's just happened. Obviously, Nigel Farage, in the wake of Anne Widdecombe's horrific murder, has talked more about the level of death threats that he's received. I believe he claims that it's been as many as 600 since February. And the sort of very specific form of demonisation, which seems to be aimed at people on the right of politics, is something which is being discussed a lot more. Also, when you're talking about people dealing with imagery of guillotines and what have you, it's a much tougher free speech argument, shall we say, for anyone to digest, certainly when it's aimed at their political tribe or their own friends and allies, given the fact that a lot of the time we talk about free speech in this country, it's people saying pretty mild things. We've been playing that debate on easy mode to a certain extent for some time. But as you say, I think even when it comes to a question of incitement, that line has to be drawn incredibly tightly. I tend to think that emulating the sort of US standard about speech, which is both likely and intended to cause imminent lawless action, is about where it should be. Anything else becomes criminalising hasty speech, hateful speech. In some cases, I'm not saying this is one of them, just sort of gallows humour. So we need to be very careful about that. But I think whilst those of us who are committed to free speech across the board will recognise that this should never have become a police matter, it does reflect something, dare I say, about what's going on in this Green Party, the kind of waters that it swims in. As you note, this was a post that he collaborated on. Polanski claims that he didn't look at it properly. I've got no reason not to believe him. He seems to have quite a kind of itchy Twitter finger, seems to repost things without thinking about it a fair few times over recent.
Especially if they're in praise of him.
Yes, so maybe that's part of the problem here. But there's something about the the vibe which exists around the Green Party. We talked a lot about the anti-Semitism, but also this over recent months. But yeah, also that kind of quite nihilistic leftism that you sort of see flare up post Charlie Kirk, post Anne Widdecombe. There's a fair bit of that, dare I say, amongst the Green parties. Maybe it wasn't such a surprise that an image like this could float into his own personal feed and end up being something that he amplifies.
I just get the impression that Zack Polanski is thick.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
Sometimes the simplest explanation is the best.
I really do. I mean, we can reach around and try and think of all of these reasons. I'm sure there's merit in a lot of those arguments, but I just get the impression that he is thick. I get the impression that he's thick when he posts videos talking about stuff on social media, which doesn't really quite make sense. I get the impression that he's thick when he does an interview on Newsnight and he says that he made a mistake in sharing that photograph, which was arguably inciting violence against Nigel Farage. But despite the fact he'd made a mistake, he wouldn't apologise for it. Isn't it pretty basic that if you think you made a mistake, you apologise for that mistake? But no, he wouldn't apologise. I thought that was a bit of a thick thing to do. And his whole stance on Israel and Gaza and the fact that he's a Green Party politician but never talks about green issues, I just get the impression he's not very bright. I think he speaks very well. I think he knows how to rile people up on social media, but I just think he's an idiot. And he spends too much time on social media, which is what all idiots do. And I think we just need to look at Zack Polanski through the lens of someone who is not very bright and perhaps is over promoted.
I think that's very strong case for that. I mean, I suppose his ratings have been going down. The Greens are only at 8% in some polls, which is, a long way away from. It was only a few months ago when people were talking about the Greens being, second to Reform, and two-party politics is back, but it's going to be Farage and Polanski at the on different sides of the House of Commons at the dispatch box at PMQs. We're a long way away from that. I mean, I wonder whether the turning point was when, essentially after the Golders Green thing, where he seemed to leap to the defence of the knife-wielding terrorists when the police officers kicked him in the head to try and relieve him of his weapon, and immediately Polanski goes about retweeting someone saying they shouldn't have been used such force. Thick, yeah. But I think Tom, would you agree that's been the sort of turning point where I think a lot of people have jumped off the Polanski train after that?
I think there has been amongst people who might have historically voted Green, who maybe started to sour on the prospect when they realised what it was that him and his tendency were bringing through the party. Kind of beyond the grousing about, there's not a lot about the environment, they say these days. I think there's a sense that some sort of darker well was being tapped into here. The straightforwardly anti-Semitic people who are landing in the party, I imagine that put some people off. I do wonder, though, looking at the polling at the moment, whether a lot of this is to do with the that kind of 18 to 24 votes who seem to be moving in no small part back over to the Labour Party. Now it isn't led by the most uniquely uninspiring figure ever to lead the Labour Party, and I think that's got something to do with it. So maybe it's a bit of both, but I more than anything else, I think there was always sort of limits to how well this Green Party could do, partly because of the ugliness that it was bringing through, but also just because ultimately, to your point, he's a quite naff figure in many ways, and maybe he can look less naff when the competition is even more naff. But it's still, yeah, I think there was always going to be a sort of ceiling to what he was going to be able to profit from. And I think Keir Starmer, and was always a complete gift to the Green Party or any party to its left, because not only was he doing things that upset the sort of activist base of the party, people who were furious about his positions on migration or Israel or whatever it might be, but there was also an element just by dint of being so uninspiring, it created that space. Burnham, as we've talked about, is in many respects quite an insubstantial figure, but he's nowhere near as uninspiring as Keir Starmer is, and I think that's really done it for them, at least for the moment.
The only other avenue I'd like to explore with this was the fact that Farage reported Polanski to the police. I think that is outrageous for Nigel Farage, for someone who believes in free speech or claims to believe in free speech, who is quite happy to platform someone like Lucy Conlett Reform Conference and complain about the authoritarian manner in which she was treated after the awful tweets that she tweeted in the 31-month prison sentence. It was outrageous. But to have that point of view and then report someone to the police for posting something on social media, I think it's a bit hypocritical.
Yeah, and I think it's not. I mean, it's not a one-off either. You know, I remember when. Do you remember when Joe Brand made that joke on? It was one of the Radio 4 panel comedy shows. She joked about throwing battery acid on Nigel Farage, and it's not. I don't think it's funny. It's not pleasant, but it was clearly intended as a joke. But it was talked about by Farage, and I don't think the Reform Party existed back then. But by Farage and his fans.
The police were certainly involved at one point. And it's one of those things that, again, given what's happened with Anne Widdecombe, given the fact that also Zack Polanski is a party leader, and I think I don't know what the thinking was in terms of reporting it to the police. I'm sure the thing that was front and centre of the mind was that the elevated level of threat that they feel that they're under more than anything else. But there's also, in the broader, I suppose, right-wing ferment, a sense that you've got to hold the left to the standards that they've set themselves. I just think that does just become a race to the bottom, frankly. It does open you up to accusations of hypocrisy.
So, but just on your point about the reporting to the police is because of the elevated threat that he's under. Nigel Farage did not think Zack Polanski was going to cut his head off with the guillotine.
I would be very surprised if that was actually part of it.
So,
I suppose what I'm getting at is, like, that might have been the thinking, that might have been the justification. That's clearly something that they've been talking about for some time. But you're absolutely right on it does open you up to accusations of hypocrisy. If you're going to hold the line, you've got to do it across the board. And also, I think that, you know, of course, there has been recognition of the fact that whether it's speech cases or all kinds of other forms of sort of two-tierism that exists at the moment, that it does seem in a remarkable number of cases that whether if you're on the political right or the political left, you might experience slightly different treatment. In my mind, that's all the more reason to sort of hold the line of principle, you know, until there's a complete clear out of the police and the entire criminal justice system. They are not going to be on your side. So you might as well say, we're standing for freedom of speech for the precise reason that we do not want to create a weapon that will be used against us, or we do not want this weapon to continue to be used against us. That seems to be a much firmer ground on which to oppose this, and also to draw a very bright line between hateful, deeply unpleasant, even quite violent in language things that people say and what people do. That is the fundamental distinction any free society has to make, and it's one that you've got to hold to, even in the face of stuff that is genuinely despicable.
Absolutely, and it would be such an easy win to draw a line between yourself and someone like Polanski, who wanted Graham Linehan to be arrested, for God's sake, for over jokes, you know.
The only party leader dumb enough to say, yes, that comedy writer should have been arrested at Heathrow Airport making jokes. Like, even the Labour Party was realised this doesn't look good.
Even Starmer, with his non-existent political antenna, was like, oh. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Albie. And thank you to everyone at home. That is only the first half of our conversation, though, because over on Spiked Podcast Unlocked, we're going to be discussing the Jason Arde scandal, which you do not want to miss. You can watch that if you're a Spiked supporter. You can find that now in the link below. But if you're not, why not sign up? Become one for just £5 a month, and you can get access to all of Spike's content. Just go to spiked-online.com/support, and we'll see you in the next half. These are so implausible, so wild. You do wonder how no one at any point in his career asked him, just said that word. Really? You sure about that?
Well, look, I mean, those claims are, if they are true, amazing. If they're not true, disappointing.
Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast. We'll be back next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the Spike podcast, then why not check out what else our channel has to offer, from our documentaries to our weekly interviews and podcasts like The Brendan O'Neill Show. And if you're a Spike supporter, you can watch the second half of this episode by logging in on the Spiked website. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then why not sign up now? You'll get unlimited access to the website, ad-free reading, discounted tickets to our events, and so much more. So become a Spike supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support.